Всем привет, how's everyone doing? Today I have a beginner's tutorial about layers in Photoshop requested by one of my subscribers. And for that, we need to go to my living room. So here we are in the living room. I do apologize for the quality of the sound. I still don't have a shotgun mic for my camera, and also the acoustics in this room is quite bad. This will be most probably the weirdest Photoshop tutorial you will ever see, but I think it will show you how layers work really well. So let's go right into our canvas, which is my glass balcony door. So here is an image. Let's imagine that this is a blank canvas in Photoshop. Let's draw something very simple. Let's say a stick man. There you go. And we're gonna call him Boris. Now Boris is a stylish man, so I want to give him a hat. I'm not really good at drawing hats, so let's just draw something like this. There you go, a cap. Now that I drew it, I'm not really sure if this is exactly what I want him to have. The problem is that since I drew it on the original, now if I try to draw a new hat, it just creates more mess. And what if I want to compare it with how it was before? It creates just a problem. And this is where layers are very handy. What layers are, and you can imagine it as a thin piece of glass that you put right on top of your original image. It will protect the original from being modified, and you can draw right on the glass and add more and more elements to your original image. Let me demonstrate this for you. Here is a new image of Boris on the same sheet of paper. Well, different. And let's create a layer, and I will open my balcony door and cover it with glass. So now we have glass covering the original image. And now that we have a layer already created, we can draw our hat. Let me move my door again, and there you go. We have the same cap. The cool part is that if I move my camera, you can see clearly how the layer of the hat is not changing the original image. That's the cool part about layers. So now, since I'm hesitating about whether this is the perfect hat, what I can do is I can just hide it, go back to the original layer or the original image, and then I can create a new layer and draw a new hat. Just like this. There you go. And the cool part is that because we're not changing the original, we can quickly change between the different layers, comparing which hat is better. So we have this one, and then I can just move and put this one. And I think this one is much better. So yeah, it's a very strange way of explaining it, but I hope it makes sense. And let me be a little bit more serious and show you the same thing but in Photoshop. So here we are in Photoshop. First things first, where are the layers? In our interface, by default, you will always find your layers on the right-hand side of your interface in a tab called Layers. As you can see on the right-hand side, we have here a number of different tabs called Layers, Channels, and Paths. Usually Layers is always selected and highlighted, and then you're gonna have all your layers on the side listed down because that's what we're gonna be working with. Now, if you by accidentally close it or you just don't find it there, don't worry, just go to Window, select the layer, or just press F7 on your keyboard. Now let's take a closer look on the Layers tab. On the top, you're gonna find a word kind with a drop-down menu, as well as a number of different icons on the side. This allows you to search for a specific layer. Next, right below the search parameters, we have a bunch of other settings, but they are all grayed out. The reason why they're grayed out is because these settings change a specific layer. So in order to be able to use them, you need to select a layer. So the question is, how do we know what or when a layer is selected? If the layer has the same color as the interface of Photoshop, because you can have different colors, it means that it is not selected. If you select it, it's going to have a brighter tone of your interface. So for example, once I press on it, it becomes lighter gray, and then you also have these little frames that show up on the preview, or there's like a mini preview of the layer. And immediately we have the parameters right on the bottom of the search section which are available for us to change. The word normal and a drop-down menu which is also associated with it is called the blending mode. We will not go into detail about what it is, but basically it allows us to blend two or more layers or images together. It is a very big topic of its own, to be honest. Next we have opacity. What opacity does is it determines how much a layer is visible in your project. If I move it to, let's say, around 50%, you will see this grayed out image and also this checkered pattern. This checkered pattern means transparency or a transparent background in Photoshop. So in this case, we can only see 50% of our layer. Right under opacity, we have fill. What fill does, it also affects the visibility of your layer, but more specifically, the effects that are applied on the layer itself. This is very handy when, for instance, you're adding something to adjust the way the image looks like, but you want to remove the intensity of it. So you can use fill rather than opacity, because opacity will change the visibility of the whole layer altogether. And then we have this lock. This gives us a number of different lock parameters which help us to protect a layer from being changed. Honestly, I don't really ever use this one, so we're gonna just skip it. And then right on the bottom we see our layer, which is currently called layer number 1, which is the image itself that we see on our preview screen. Now once you're adding more and more layers, they're gonna be showing up right here. And on the bottom of this whole tab, we have also a number of different icons. The first one is called effects, which allows you to add effects to a specific layer. Then you have masking, which allows us to hide specific parts of an image without destructing it. In other words, if you are using an eraser tool, you are going to be deleting pixels permanently, while masking will just hide them and make them transparent. Then we have our adjustment layer, which controls the different parameters of an image or a layer. Don't worry, we're gonna get there. We have our folder, which allows us to arrange different layers in different folders just to clean up things. And then we have this little box with a plus, which is create a new layer. The other two ways of creating a new layer is using a keyboard shortcut, which will be Shift Ctrl Alt N, or using the layer tab on the top of your Photoshop screen and then pressing new and then selecting the layer you want. For instance, we press layer, you rename it, and then you press OK. Now you can also access extended features or settings of your layers, and you can do it in 3 different ways. Each one of them will give you different results. You can press on this little icon on the top right corner of the whole tab, and it's going to give you a number of different settings. You can right click on the icon of the layer. It's going to give you also a different result, and you can right click on the layer itself and once again gives you a different result. We're not going to go through all of them. What I want to focus on is the ability to merge layers. There are different types, so let's quickly just create 2 more layers, and with the brush tool we'll just make a circle on each one of them. So the first type of merge, and we can just right click on the layer, is merge down. What merge down does is it only merges the layer that you selected with the one directly below it. So in this case, if I press merge down, it will merge it with layer number 2. And as you can see, now these 2 circles are together. The next option is merge visible. For this option to properly work, what you need to have is a layer that is invisible. So let's actually make one of them invisible, let's say layer 2. And we can do this by just pressing on this eye icon beside each layer. Press on it, it disappears. And now let's right click on layer 3, press merge visible. What it did was merge layer 3 with layer 1 and left layer 2, which is invisible, alone. Now let's press again Ctrl Z, and this time we're gonna right click on layer 3 and press flatten image. What that does is it merges all the layers together. However, if you have an invisible layer, like in this case, it will ask you whether you want to discard the hidden layer or not. If you press OK, it'll merge everything and delete the layer that is invisible. However, if you press cancel, it will not do anything. And the fourth option, and it only shows up when you select specific layers. So let's select layer 3, let's press and hold Ctrl on our keyboard and press layer 1 and then press right click, and then you will see that instead of merge down you have merge layers, and once you press on it, it will merge only the layers that you selected. Now let's look at the different types of layers and also compare the analogy that I showed you in the beginning of the video with the balcony door. The first type of layer that you have is called a pixel layer. This one takes its name from the contents that you see inside the layer, which is pixels. As you know, a pixel makes up an image. Now there's two types or two versions of it. The first one where you already have an image, like in this case you have this mountain image, but also you can create a completely blank layer which has nothing. So imagine this is just a transparent sheet of glass. So let's create one by just pressing the plus icon, and that immediately creates a new layer called layer 2 right above our original image. Now let's do something very important. This is a pro tip. Always rename and name your layers properly. This will save you so much time when you're trying to edit your images, because trust me, you're gonna have dozens of them. And also it allows you to be able to actually use the search functions to find them much quicker. So in this case, I'm gonna rename the first layer as, let's call it landscape. And then the second one, I'm gonna call it our brush. Now to demonstrate you the analogy of the balcony door, let's select our landscape layer and I'm gonna press B on my keyboard. This will pull up a brush tool. With the brush tool, I will let's just make like, I don't know, 3 circles like this. Let's say that I'm not happy with this and this is a mistake. So I'm gonna try to erase this. To erase, you can use your eraser tool, or I'm gonna press E on my keyboard. And let's try to erase it. So far so good, it's erasing this, but look what it's doing. It's also erasing the image itself. And that's why we see the checkered pattern in behind it, because we're erasing the whole image and this area inside is basically transparent. So as I was explaining with the first example, drawing on the original image is like drawing using a marker on a paper and you cannot erase it anymore. Photoshop thinks as if it's one element. Let's press Ctrl Z a couple of times just to redo what we did. Go back to how it was, and now let's try to do the same thing, but this time we are going to be pressing on our brush layer, which is our glass sheet. Now let's press B for our brush. Let's make the same 3 dots. Now let's press E for our eraser tool and let's start erasing. Look what it's doing. It's only affecting the circles, but not the original image. Like the analogy, it is not connected to the original image. And the same thing goes for movement. So if I take the move tool and I move only the circles will move, or if I select the background, only the background move whilst the rest stays where it is. Now let's delete this layer because we no longer need it, and let's move on to the next type of layer, which is a text layer. To create a text layer, we need to first select the text icon, which is on your left hand side. It is a text tool. Then you will press and hold anywhere on your image and you're gonna draw a text box. Once you release, usually the lorem ipsum shows up, and then you can write whatever you want. So let's say hello. If you want to change the color, just select it all by either highlighting it or just pressing Ctrl A. And then on the top, you can change the different parameters, including the font and also the size and the color. So let's make it nice and black, just so that we can easily see it. The cool part about this type of layer is that it auto names itself. So if we look right now on our right hand side, we have a new layer created which says layer 1. However, once I confirm these settings by just pressing escape, it will rename your layer into what you wrote within the text box. So in this case, it's hello. And then if you want to make some changes, you can just press on the text icon, press on the text itself. It's going to highlight the text again, and then all you can do is just add another word. And then you press escape. And as you can see on our right hand side, the layer updates itself into what is written in our layer. This is super handy to find the layers and you don't need to do it yourself. The way you differentiate a text layer from another layer, for instance in this case a landscape layer, is in the mini preview you will always have a T, which means text. While for instance in the landscape or any pixel layers, you will have the contents of that layer visible inside. Now, let's move on to the next one, which is the shape layer. For that one, you need to create a shape. To do so, we can go to our left-hand side and we have a tool called the ellipse tool. However, if we right-click on it, it'll give us an option to create other different shapes. Let's take the rectangle, for instance. Let's just press and hold once again and draw a nice rectangle right here. Once you release the mouse, immediately a shape is created and is shown on your project, and on your right hand side you have a new layer called rectangle 1. This type of layers or shape layers are identified using this little icon, which is a square with little small squares on each corner which define a shape. Note that these little icons are the same icons you find in your search bar. They correspond to the same thing. It's just to make it easier for you to know which one you're looking for. Now, if you want to change your rectangle, then you can either do it above, you have the properties tab, or you can do it on the top left corner, you also have similar options. For instance, if I want to remove this black outline, I can just go to the parameters and then select, for instance, the color of it and press transparency, so this way we don't see it at all. And then for instance, I don't really like the color, it doesn't really fit the whole vibe, so let's pick color, and well, it's just totally random. Let's take this nice deep blue, for instance. There we go. The next is the adjustment layer. Now, unlike the other three that we already mentioned, which have something physical inside, so an image, a shape, or a text, this one allows us to change the different parameters of the image itself. So for instance, the color, the saturation, the brightness, the darkness. So let me demonstrate that by creating an adjustment layer. To do this, we can go to the bottom of our layers panel and we will find our adjustment layer. Let's press on it, and there's a bunch of different settings that you can play around, and for us right now let's choose hue and saturation. This type of adjustment layer will allow us to change the hue, which is the tone of our colors within our image, and the saturation, which is the intensity of the colors. And as an added bonus, it also allows us to change the brightness of the overall image. So as you can see, it created a new layer called hue and saturation, which looks a little bit different rather than the other layers. And in our properties pane or tab, we have our hue, saturation, and lightness parameters. So now what I can do is I can just shift the slider, and as you can see, the colors change in different ways. Finally, we have a layer that is called a smart object. You can take any layer within your image and then you can turn it into a smart layer by just right-clicking on it and then selecting Convert to Smart Object. What a smart object is basically outsourcing your image to a separate document. Now, Photoshop does it on its own. It creates a different document with its own different extension file and links it to your main project. The benefit of using this type of project is that it protects your image and allows you to then apply different effects without permanently applying effects on the layer itself. I know it sounds complicated, but don't worry, it's not super important right now. However, if you want to know more about it and how it works and what it is, do check out my video called 5 Tips to Better Blend Images. There I go into more detail about this function because it is super helpful when you're working with different layers and changing the different parameters such as the colors and the adjustments and the brightness. because there's different ways you can do it. You can either use different layers, or you can apply effects directly on a specific layer in a different way. Anyways, moving on, now that we know the different types of layers, it is important to talk about how do they all behave together. Now remember the analogy of the different sheets of glass. You have your original image, then you have one sheet, you draw on it, then a second one, you draw on, and a third one. And they all are in a specific order. Then of course, if you want to change the order, you would need to take one or two of these different sheets and then just put one underneath. It's the same principle with Photoshop. All your layers stack one above each other. However, you can change the positions as you want. And they are all in the same order in terms of visibility as they are shown on your bar on your right hand side. So everything that is on top will be in the foreground of your image, and everything that's going to be on the bottom will be underneath. So if we look at our image right here, what do we have? We have the first layer, or the top layer, is our hue and saturation, our adjustment layer. This one changes the color of the entire image. Then we have our rectangle, which is underneath, so it's also affected by the coloring. Then we have our text, which is underneath the rectangle. However, we do not see the text, because the rectangle is covering up the whole text, and then of course we have the landscape. Now, how do we change the positions of the layers? It is super simple. All you need to do is just press and hold the layer that you want to move, and then just drag your mouse up and down. As you can see, it just starts moving. And then the blue line that you see between the layers is an indication of where you are going to be adding your layer. So in this case, I want to put it underneath my hue and saturation, my adjustment layer, but above my rectangle. Once I place it, I release the mouse button. Now your text goes above the rectangle and is visible on our image. Now, to demonstrate to you even further, what we can do is we can actually change the position of the adjustment layer that is changing the color. For instance, I want the adjustment layer that is changing the tones of our image to only apply on the landscape layer. So let's do the same thing. Let's press on the layer and let's just drag it all the way down right above the landscape, release it, and as you can see, this adjustment layer only applies on the landscape now. Now, another interesting behavior of our layers is that you can connect or link a layer directly to a layer below it, meaning that you're gonna make, for instance, an adjustment layer only affect the layer below it. Let me demonstrate it. Let's say I want to apply this effect only on the rectangle, but not on the landscape. What I can do is, I can take our adjustment layer, I can put it above our rectangle, which will be affecting both the rectangle and the landscape. And then what I can do is I can hold Alt on my keyboard, and then with my mouse, the cursor, I can hover it between the separation or line between the layers. And as you can see, an icon shows up of a square with an arrow going down. This basically indicates that you can link a layer to the one below. And let's over dramatize this just for the sake of this example. So let me just change the saturation to a much bigger tone. And now press and hold Alt, click in between the two layers. And now you can see that our landscape went back to its original version. However, the hue or the color of our box has changed. And this is basically it when it comes to the basics of layers. What is important for you also to remember that any project that you're going to be working will be a combination of dozens of different layers all contributing to the final piece. Now, this project, you should always save it, and it saves as a Photoshop native file with an extension of PSD. This will contain all the information with all your layers and all your adjustments, effects, allowing you to go back to this file at any point in time and to continue working or editing something in it. If you want to export it and to share it with your friends or your social media, you will need to save it as one of the commonly used file formats to share photos, for instance, a JPEG file. What Photoshop does when exporting is it basically merges all the layers into just one file. It is important for you to remember that when you're exporting or saving it, it will always save exactly what you see on your project. For instance, in this case, if I go to File, Save As, press Save on the computer, you choose the folder where you want to save it, you name the file, let's say tutorial, then you go to Save As Type and you choose JPEG, and then you press Save. It will save the file exactly like you see it right now. However, if you hide the layer of the rectangle and you save it, it will save it without the rectangle included in the file. It is important for you to know that because you need to make sure that all the layers that you want to be visible are actually visible in your documents in Photoshop when you're exporting it and saving it on your computer. And that's basically it. I hope you found this super useful. Thank you for suggesting to do this beginner tutorial. It was really fun for me to make it and to remember all these things. As always, thank you for watching. If you have any more suggestions, do let me know in the comment section below. Do consider subscribing and dropping a like on this video. It really helps out the channel. And as always, thank you for watching and I see you in the next one. Пока!